Lena hadn't meant to fall asleep. Not on a stranger's shoulder, not with her 3-month-old baby pressed to her chest, and definitely not on a moving train headed straight into the desert, where no one would hear the screams if something went wrong. But when she woke up, the man beside her, the one with the suit, the stillness, the unreadable eyes was gone, and she was no longer on the train. She was on a ranch. And someone had just sent that man a message. The train explodes in 2 hours unless you do exactly as we say. What Lena did next wasn't part of the plan, but it changed everything. The train swayed gently as it cut through the dusty Nevada plains, the sun a burning disk above the endless horizon. Inside one of the last passenger cars, the air was dry and still, except for the low hum of conversation and the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. Lena Carter sat by the window, clutching her baby girl, Rosie, close to her chest in a faded gray sling. Rosie was only 3 months old and surprisingly quiet for an infant. Her wide eyes blinked slowly, half asleep, lulled by the vibrations of the train and the warmth of her mother's heartbeat. Lena, on the other hand, looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and the shadows under her eyes were deep enough to suggest weeks of running, surviving, hiding. She adjusted the sling and looked around the half-empty car. A family 2 rows ahead was sharing snacks. A man with headphones tapped on a laptop nearby. Beside her sat a man in a dark navy suit with a crisp white shirt, a silver watch, and the kind of stillness that only came from control. He hadn't spoken since she sat down, hadn't looked at her, hadn't judged her for boarding with a crying baby in a threadbare diaper bag. He smelled faintly of pine and something expensive she couldn't name. She guessed he was important, rich, powerful, and utterly uninterested in someone like her. But exhaustion made decisions for her now. She hadn't eaten since the day before. She'd barely made it onto the train with her last crumpled bills. Her body ached from holding Rosie nonstop, and the constant fear, of being found still clawed at the edges of her mind. The baby began to fuss softly. Lena rocked slightly, murmuring, pressing a hand over Rosie's back. The motion made her vision blur for a second, then another. She tried to straighten up, but her head lolled forward. And then it happened. Her body gave in. Her head dropped gently onto the man's shoulder. For a second, she expected him to flinch, to snap at her, to pull away in icy silence. But he didn't. He didn't move at all. Cole Everett sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the window across the aisle, his jaw tight. He noticed the weight of her head, the way her body leaned into his. He noticed the baby, warm and impossibly small, pressed between them. And he noticed something else, something quieter, the instinct not to pull away. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from. But in the silence of that swaying train, he felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of humanity he'd forgotten he still had. He let her sleep, and for the first time in weeks, so did she. Cole Everett stared out the window, his thoughts scattered somewhere between the desert and his calendar. Meetings, contracts, delays, and that damn board vote he'd been dodging. He should have flown, but he hadn't wanted to. For once, he wanted to be unreachable. No jet, no assistant, no one needing his signature every 5 minutes. He didn't expect a stranger to fall asleep on his shoulder. The weight of her head, the warmth of the baby pressed between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Too familiar in another sense he didn't want to think about. He didn't move, not for her sake, not out of politeness, but because something about the moment made him feel strangely grounded. Then his phone buzzed. No ringtone, no email chime, just a single silent vibration, the kind reserved for secure messages. His thumb hovered over the screen as he slid it out from his pocket. Unknown sender. Do not move. Do not speak. You have 2 hours. If anyone is alerted, the train will explode. Coordinates and voice verification uploaded. You know what this is. Comply or everyone on board dies. Cole's entire body went cold. He locked the screen, slipped the phone into his palm, and glanced around. No one was watching him. The mother next to him was still asleep. Her baby let out a soft sigh against her chest. Across the aisle, a teenager was tapping through TikTok videos. A man in front of him adjusted his seat and pulled out a sandwich. It all looked so normal. He stood carefully, slid out from under the woman's head, and walked calmly toward the restroom at the back of the car. Once inside, he locked the door, turned on the faucet to muffle noise, and opened the message again. A link appeared. He clicked it. A GPS map loaded instantly, showing a stretch of track ahead, about 30 miles away, near an old water tower, long since decommissioned. The note was clear. That's where he was expected to get off, where someone or something would be waiting. A biometric voice tag was attached. He played it once and realized with a jolt, they had his voice, somehow, and they'd matched it to the system on the train. He could feel the pressure building in his chest. These people weren't bluffing. Whoever E was, they knew who he was, where he was, and what this train meant. And they had the leverage to do something unthinkable. When he returned to his seat, the woman was awake. She looked at him with wide, cautious eyes. The baby still slept, unaware of the danger cradled in her mother's arms. "You got the message," she said softly. His mouth went dry. "What?" "I saw it, reflected in the window. That icon? The code? I've seen it before." He stared at her, unsure whether to lie or run. She leaned in closer. "You don't have time to pretend you're just a businessman." He blinked. "Who are you?" She gave the faintest smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm someone who ran from the same people who sent that message, and I think they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." Cole stared at her. The baby stirred quietly. And in that surreal moment, he realized two things. He wasn't alone. And this woman, this broke, exhausted mother with a child in her arms, was about to change everything. Cole had dealt with high-stakes threats before: corporate sabotage, lawsuits, regulatory blackmail. But this was different. This wasn't financial. This was human. 93 passengers on board, including the woman sitting beside him and her sleeping child, were now hostages in a silent standoff. And somehow she knew. She didn't look scared. She looked resolved. That unsettled him more than the message itself. "You said you've seen that symbol before," he said, keeping his voice low. She nodded, brushing a hand protectively over her baby's head. "They used to brand crates with it, back when I was a kid, back when I was trapped on a survivalist commune in Utah." Cole narrowed his eyes. "They call themselves ecological realists now. Back then, they were just angry men playing God with diesel generators and bomb manuals." "You escaped." "Barely," she said. "I was 16. I hitchhiked out with a half-dead backpack and nothing else." "What do they want from me?" he asked. She looked at him sharply. "You're Everett, as in Evergrowth Industries. Your company shut down a dozen illegal land operations tied to them. You cut off their pipeline, their funding. You're not just a target. You're the target." He swallowed, glancing briefly toward the front of the car. No movement, just the hum of the tracks and oblivious passengers. "They want you off the train, alive at first. Your leverage, or a symbol. Either way, it ends the same. With a bomb, with everyone dead. That's how they operate now. Shock and purge." Cole clenched his jaw. "We can alert the conductor. Stop the train." She grabbed his arm. "No. If they know you've told anyone, they'll trigger it remotely. That's how this works. Isolation, fear, obedience." He looked down at her fingers on his sleeve, then at the baby. Rosie stirred lightly in the sling, her cheek pressed against her mother's chest. "You need to go," she said. "What?" "You're supposed to leave the train at the marked coordinates. That's what they want. And while they're watching that, I'll go instead." "No, absolutely not. They don't know what you look like. I know how they think. I've studied the way they move, the way they recruit. They won't see me as a threat." "You have a baby." "I also have a chance to stop this," she said. "Do you?" He shook his head in disbelief. "That's not your job. It wasn't yours either. But here we are." He looked at her, really looked at her. Her face was drawn, exhausted, but there was steel in her eyes. Not recklessness. Purpose. She reached into her bag and pulled out a scarf. "Give me your blazer, your name badge, your confidence." "You could die," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "So could everyone else." He hesitated for only a second more before slipping off his blazer and handing her the credentials clipped to the inside pocket. They moved fast, quietly. She tied her hair back, covered it with the scarf, zipped Rosie deeper into her jacket. When she stood in the aisle again, she didn't look like a runaway anymore. She looked like power in disguise. Cole felt his chest tighten as she walked away, stepping toward the next car. She didn't look back. She just whispered to her daughter, "You're going to grow up in a world I saved." And then she disappeared through the door. Lena stepped off the train onto the dusty service platform near a long-abandoned switching station in the middle of nowhere. The train didn't stop completely, just slowed enough for her to jump down without suspicion. Her boots hit the gravel with a hard thud. She didn't look back. Rosie shifted lightly in the sling beneath her coat, letting out a soft, tired whimper. Lena whispered to her, steadying her breath. The sun was blistering, the sky empty. Nothing around but rusting tracks, dry shrubs, and a dirt road that looked as if it had been carved into the earth with violence. Exactly as she remembered. Minutes later, a black SUV emerged from the shimmering heat. Dust kicked up behind it in a jagged wave. Lena stood still as it came to a halt in front of her. The back door opened. A man stepped out. Long coat, tactical boots, wire in his ear. His beard was trimmed with military precision, his face oddly expressionless. "Mr. Everett?" he asked. Lena nodded once, her voice even. "Yes." He looked her up and down, clearly puzzled by her appearance, but not enough to question her directly. "You brought the child?" She wouldn't stop screaming. "I didn't have a choice." The man stared for a long moment, then gestured for her to get in. She slid into the back seat without hesitation, shielding Rosie from the heat as best she could. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Beside her sat another man, bigger, older, with a familiar scar running down the side of his face. Lena froze. He didn't speak right away. Then in a low, gravel-thick voice, he said, "Didn't think I'd ever see you again, girl." Her mouth went dry. Caleb, one of the original enforcers of the compound she had escaped from. He used to make her scrub floors with bloody knuckles. He had once held a knife to her throat during a lesson. She kept her voice calm. "I'm not here to reminisce." He snorted, leaned back. "No, I guess you're not. Never thought you had it in you to come back, let alone wearing a CEO's skin." Lena said nothing. They drove for 20 minutes in silence, deeper into the desert. Eventually, the road dissolved into rough, cracked earth. A chain-link gate opened to reveal the old ranch. She recognized it immediately. Faded barn, half-buried fuel tanks, the main house with the rusted windmill still creaking in the wind. It hadn't changed, but she had. Inside, the ranch was buzzing with quiet activity. Men with rifles, drones charging in the corner. A wall of monitors showing security feeds. It was no longer just a survivalist outpost. It was a tactical hub, a launch pad for something bigger. She was led into a back room. There, sitting at a desk, was a man in a desert camo jacket with dark eyes and a smile like a knife. Elias Trent, the man behind the message. The new E. He stood slowly, studying her. "Well, well, Everett shows up after all. With a child, no less. Unexpected." "I don't leave people behind," she said. "Even small ones." Elias tilted his head. "We've been watching you for years. Imagine our surprise when our old ghost girl shows up in the skin of our enemy." She shrugged. "The world turns." He smiled. "And now it stops. With you." She knew what he meant. They wouldn't let her leave. The baby, maybe. Her, never. But she had planned for this. She sat down, adjusted Rosie's position, and asked, "So what happens now?" Elias looked at her. "We wait for confirmation. The train passes the point in 15 minutes. When the system doesn't detect interference, boom, you're the last witness." Lena felt her heart twist. She had bought time, but not enough. Unless Cole could find the bomb and disable it before the train reached the kill zone, everyone would die. And all she could do now was stall. So she smiled back. "Well," she said, "then let's make small talk while we wait to murder 100 innocent people." Elias laughed. She only needed 10 more minutes, maybe less. She tapped her finger once against the side of Rosie's blanket. Inside, strapped against the infant carrier, was a military-grade GPS beacon stolen from the ranch years ago. She'd activated it when she stepped off the train, and somewhere, far above, a signal had already pinged. Cole moved quickly and quietly through the length of the train, now just 20 minutes away from the coordinates in the threat. He had never broken a sweat in a boardroom, but now his palms were soaked. He counted every car, every corner, every suspicious face. Nothing. The train was calm, normal, too normal. Then he reached the luggage car. It smelled of metal and heat. Crates were stacked haphazardly, some tied down, others loose. He stepped over a fallen suitcase and spotted something that didn't fit. A sleek black case, box-shaped, marked with no airline tags, sitting completely isolated. It had no lock, no visible brand, just a tiny light blinking near the base. Red. Steady. He crouched beside it, pulled off his blazer, and reached slowly toward the panel on the back. There it was, a biometric interface designed for voice and palm confirmation, the kind used by high-clearance contractors, and a tiny inset screen displaying a countdown. 0, I'm 14, or 8. He inhaled sharply. 14 minutes left. A prompt flashed. Voice authentication required. He pressed his hand to the panel. Nothing. His palm wasn't enough. The message repeated, louder this time, beeping sharply. He looked around. No signal in this part of the train. No Wi-Fi. No service. He opened his emergency device, satellite encrypted, and tried the direct channel Lena had activated before leaving. The signal was faint, intermittent. He keyed in a single message. Device found. Countdown active. Voice access required. Confirm safety. No response. The seconds ticked by. The train rocked forward, steady and relentless. He stared at the screen again. 01203. His heart thudded so loudly he thought he might pass out. Then, suddenly, the screen flickered. A message popped up. Signal inbound. 1 bar. Stand by for voice channel. He hit connect. Static. Then her voice. Cole, you there? He nearly collapsed with relief. Lena, I found it. It needs your voice. I know, she said quickly. Listen carefully. They think I'm you. They're watching the train remotely. If they detect interference. Too late, he said. We're already inside the threshold. I have less than 11 minutes. Silence. Then her voice calm and clear. Access code Charlie 908. Voice phrase Operation Reset confirmed. Everett Authorization Alpha. Repeated exactly. He placed his hand back on the panel and repeated the phrase. The panel paused, then clicked. Voice match confirmed. Device armed for disarming sequence. 0, 10 to 12. A new interface opened. The options were in Russian. Cole recognized just enough from an old military briefing to know which button meant disarm. He selected it. The system requested a final voice line. He looked back at the open line. Lena, it's asking for final confirmation. There was a pause, then her voice, steady and absolute. Rosie Carter, daughter of Lena Carter. Confirming voice access. Proceed. The system ran a verification scan. Voice match verified. Final code accepted. Disarming. Cole watched as the countdown stopped at 00:08:56. The red light blinked twice, then turned off. The silence that followed was unbearable in its weight. He leaned against the wall, breath shaking. He closed his eyes. The train rolled on. Everyone was still alive. He picked up the case carefully and started walking back. But even as the tension ebbed from his chest, a cold fear crept in behind it. Because Lena was still with them. And if they realized the truth, that she wasn't him, the plan would fall apart. He had disarmed the bomb. Now he had to make sure she didn't become one. The room inside the ranch had grown still, as if the air itself was waiting. Lena sat in the folding chair across from Elias Trent, Rosie sleeping against her chest, her tiny fists curled under her chin. Sweat dripped down Lena's spine despite the cold metal walls. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just breathed, slowly and evenly, counting the seconds. Elias checked his watch, then tapped a laptop on the table. A small monitor lit up with a digital map. A red dot pulsed on the railway route. The train. He turned the screen so she could see. Any minute now, he said almost gleefully. That's where your former self will cease to exist, along with 90-some civilians. But hey, progress comes at a cost. Lena didn't respond. She kept her gaze steady, careful. How's it feel? Elias asked. Knowing your name will be the last one attached to that train? You'll be a martyr for a machine you never believed in. I stopped believing in people like you long before I stopped believing in machines, she said quietly. He smirked, leaned back. You've changed, he said. You haven't. Elias stood and began to pace slowly behind her. You know, when I saw your name come through the facial scanner, I thought, no way. Our lost little Lena, the girl who ran off crying into the desert, the one we thought would be found dead behind a truck stop? He chuckled. And here you are, in a suit, with his name. She clenched her jaw. You think wearing a CEO's skin makes you powerful? I think protecting my child does. Elias stopped pacing. His expression shifted, darkened. You're not walking out of here. She didn't react. I never intended to, she said. But you will. He stared at her, frowning. What does that mean? Outside, the low thrum of engines started up. Lena's fingers, resting casually on the baby sling, pressed once, deliberately, on the strap's hidden clasp. Inside, the GPS beacon sent out a full signal burst. 1 mile above the ranch, a drone locked onto the signal. Then another. Within seconds, the perimeter was hit with a pulse wave strong enough to jam all outgoing signals. Every screen in the room flickered and died. Elias looked around sharply. What the hell? Then came the sound of chopper blades. Lena stood up slowly, steadying Rosie against her chest. The room flooded with light from overhead spot lamps. Boots hit the gravel outside. Voices barked orders. Then, gunfire in the distance. Short, controlled bursts. The door behind her burst open. 3 federal agents stormed in with weapons raised. They moved with precision, sweeping the room, yelling commands. Elias reached for his holster, but it was too late. He was tackled to the floor. The second agent grabbed Lena by the arm, not roughly, and shouted, Are you Lena Carter? She nodded. My name's in the system. The baby's safe. She's clean. The agent's voice cracked with adrenaline. You disarmed a federal-level explosive device with 3 minutes to spare. Do you know what you just prevented? Lena exhaled shakily. Yes. They ushered her out of the room, shielding her and the baby. Outside, the ranch was chaos. Dozens of men in tactical gear, flashlights cutting through the dust, half the compound already secured. Lena turned her head one last time. Elias was being dragged out in cuffs, shouting something incoherent about betrayal and rot and cycles. She didn't look back again. In the helicopter that lifted them from the desert, she held Rosie close and whispered into her soft, warm hair. You'll never know that world, baby girl. Never. As they rose above the empty landscape, Lena closed her eyes. Not from fear, but release. She had survived. Again. The hospital room was quiet, except for the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and the occasional distant footsteps in the hallway. Lena lay propped against white pillows, Rosie asleep beside her in a bassinet. She was wrapped in a warm swaddle, her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect peace. Lena stared at the ceiling, the exhaustion now catching up to her in waves. Not just from the day, the chase, the deception, the explosion that never came, but from the years that had led her here. Every moment of running, hiding, surviving had built to this one impossible truth. They were safe, and the world had seen her. The news had broken just hours after the extraction. Every major network ran the headline, Mother disguised as CEO helps foil train bombing, FBI credits, extraordinary bravery. Her name was no longer a ghost in the system. She was a survivor with a voice. A knock on the door pulled her from the silence. She turned her head. Cole stood in the doorway. He looked worn, like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 hours, but his eyes were alive. More alive than she'd ever seen them. No suit, just a gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, a bandage on his forearm where he'd cut himself climbing through a service car. Lena tried to sit up straighter, but he waved her off. Don't move, he said. You've done enough. She offered a tired smile. You found the bomb? He nodded. Just barely. Your voice saved everyone. The final code. It had to be you. Lena glanced down at Rosie. She's the reason I never gave up, even when everything told me to disappear. Cole stepped closer, pulling a chair beside her bed. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just sat in the calm after the storm. You know they're calling you a hero, he said quietly. She scoffed softly. If by hero they mean broke single mom with 1 diaper left, then sure. I mean it. He met her eyes. You did what I couldn't. You walked into hell knowing it might kill you, and you did it with your daughter in your arms. You let me, she said. You trusted me. That's not something people like you usually do with people like me. He leaned back, folding his hands. Maybe people like me needed to wake up. There was a long silence. Then, what happens now? She asked. Cole looked at her. I don't know, but I do know this. I have resources, influence, land, and I've been sitting in boardrooms wondering what legacy actually means. Maybe this is it. Lena tilted her head. I want to rebuild that ranch, he said. Not for extremists, for mothers, for people who've escaped what you escaped. Shelter, education, childcare, safety, a place to breathe. She blinked, stunned. You'd do that? I wouldn't just do it, he said. I'd want you to run it. Lena swallowed. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. I've never run anything. You've run from everything, he said, and you're still standing. That makes you qualified in ways no resume could ever prove. A nurse walked in quietly, checked a chart, smiled, then disappeared. Lena looked down at Rosie, then back at Cole. I'll think about it, she whispered. Good, he said, because we'll call it Rosie's Place. And I'd really hate to name it that without permission. Lena laughed. For the first time in what felt like years, it wasn't a defense mechanism. It was real. She looked around the room, the tiny sleeping form beside her, the man who had seen her for who she was and hadn't turned away. And she whispered to no one in particular, I think we just made it out. 1 year later, the ranch looked nothing like the place it had once been. The crumbling fences had been rebuilt. The poisoned soil had been replaced with clean earth, now blooming with wildflowers, herbs, and soft green grass. Where old weapons had once been buried, children now ran barefoot, chasing bubbles through the sunlit courtyard. The sign at the entrance read, Rosie's Place, a sanctuary for women and children. It was carved by hand into warm cedar, and underneath it, in smaller letters, the words, You are not broken. You are not alone. Lena stood near the garden beds, her sleeves rolled up, holding a watering can in one hand while balancing Rosie on her hip with the other. Rosie, now walking and babbling, giggled as she reached toward a row of cherry tomatoes. She wore a tiny straw hat and pink overalls, her curls glowing gold in the afternoon light. Gentle, Lena whispered, guiding her hand. We don't pull, just touch. The ranch had transformed into a living, breathing network of resilience. There were now 4 housing units, a shared kitchen, a medical room, a playroom filled with soft pillows and books, and a multi-use hall where women gathered each morning to drink coffee and share silence or stories, whatever they needed most. They came from everywhere, some from shelters, some from cars parked behind gas stations, some fresh out of domestic violence courts. No questions asked, only welcome. Lena wasn't just the founder, she was the heart of it. She sat with every woman on intake day. She remembered names, babies' birthdays, and which children needed nightlights. She'd never studied social work. She didn't have a college degree, but no one cared because what she had was rarer. She understood. Cole arrived that day just before sunset, stepping out of his truck in jeans and boots, holding 2 cups of lemonade. He spotted Lena by the fence, waved and walked over, offering her one. You plant those yourself? He asked, nodding at the sprouting sunflowers. Lena smiled. No, that was Maya and her daughter. They said it was for joy. Well, he said, glancing around, seems to be working. They stood for a moment in the warm stillness, watching a few children chase each other around the fountain, their laughter rising like music into the golden sky. Tomorrow's the ceremony, he said after a while. Lena nodded. Press, donors, local officials, whole crowd coming. You ready? She turned to him. No, but I'll stand there anyway. He smiled. That's what leaders do. She looked down at Rosie, now wobbling off toward a picnic blanket where 2 toddlers were stacking blocks. Did you ever think? She started, then shook her head. No, never mind. What? That day on the train, she said. Did you ever think it would lead to this? Cole took a long breath. I didn't think we'd survive that day. But we did. We did. Later, just before dusk, the women of Rosie's Place gathered around a fire pit. It wasn't part of any official schedule, just something they'd started doing, naturally, like instinct. Sharing space, breathing together. Lena sat among them, Rosie asleep in her lap, her small hand wrapped in her mother's shirt. One of the women, Tamika, a former nurse from Phoenix, held up her mug and said, To the woman who burned the past to build something better. Everyone lifted their cups. Lena blinked fast, trying not to cry. She didn't like speeches. She preferred action. But tonight she let herself speak. I didn't burn anything, she said softly. I just stopped running. The fire crackled. And maybe, she added, that's when the real saving starts. Not when someone rescues you, but when you stop running from yourself. The flames danced. The sky turned dark. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes sang. And above it all, Rosie slept quietly, safe in a place her mother had built from ashes, not with fear, but with hope. What makes this ending powerful isn't just that Lena and her daughter survived. It's how they reclaimed their survival and turned it into sanctuary. This story isn't about rescue in the traditional sense. It's about a woman who had every reason to give up, who had been underestimated, ignored, overlooked, and still chose to stand between danger and innocence, even with a child in her arms. The ranch transformed into Rosie's place is more than poetic justice. It's a response to the systems that fail women like Lena, a living, breathing answer built not with policy or speeches, but with hands, heart, and lived experience. The final chapter doesn't tie things up in a neat bow. Life is too messy for that. But it does land in a place of earned peace, of a woman writing her future in a world that once tried to erase her. To me, this is not a story about a bomb. It's a story about a woman who refused to let her trauma define her, who turned something meant to destroy into something that heals. And that, I think, is the most powerful kind of ending we can write, one that makes space for others to begin again.